Hola, buenas tardes, ¿qué tal? ¿Qué tal estáis? Bueno, primero de nada, decidme por favor que se escucha bien y segundo, perdonad que el streaming va a ser en inglés, ¿vale? ¿Qué tal, David? ¿Qué tal, Arcanos? Gracias por pasaros. Así que nada, vamos directos para el inglés. Um, Hi and welcome to you all to my 12th Pit Talk, and I have with me today, two amazing women. We have Alison, Donnelly, and Kate Bevan. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Bevan,
Bevan.
like
Bevan.
heaven.
Heaven. Ah, yeah, Bevan. Okay, good. Got it perfectly. Thank you. So, you might be asking yourselves, who are these amazing women? Well, Kate is the board member and strategic advisor, and Alison is the CEO of More Than Equal, an amazing project founded by David Coulthard. Of course, you guys may know about him, and also Carol Komarek. And they are they're putting a lot of effort to understanding gender differences in motorsport and also trying to raise and nurture the first ever female Formula One champion. Welcome to you both. Thank you for letting me kidnap you for more or less an hour. And yeah, and overall, give us your time and just being here with us today.
Pleasure.
Very good to be here. My first time on Twitch ever.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy the platform. Okay, so people at home, could you hear the three of us? Could you hear us just fine? Do I need to adjust anything? Lo voy a preguntar también en español por si acaso, si nos escucha bien a las tres. Buenas tardes y... Hi, guys. Sí. Un pedir aquí, vale. Well, to do that, I'm just gonna, like, bring up the volume overall. Good. So, okay. First of all, tell us a little bit more about yourselves. I don't know who would like to start, whether it's Alison or Kate.
Well, Alison's first in the alphabet.
Yeah,
Good.
and I have to insist you call me Allie. Alison makes it sound like I'm getting in trouble.
Okay,
Um,
Ali.
yeah. So yeah, well, thanks for having us. And I started at More Than Equal in March, so relatively new, although we've been racing through work since then. I'm a newcomer to motorsport, so my background is primarily in communications and marketing in both government and politics and sport here in the UK. I joined because I have a huge passion for gender equality in sport, and I've worked, with and across other sports who are working to make change in this area, particularly in rugby, which is also a very
Oh,
male-dominated sport and a sport that I played for a long time and coached. And I think the opportunity to come into this sport where on the one hand, we have this incredibly ambitious goal at More Than Equal, and we have founders who are incredibly passionate and advisors like Kate who really know their stuff. And on the other, you've got this sport which is quite far behind in terms of gender equality for a mixed gender sport. So I just saw this as an incredible opportunity to do something quite transformative, albeit something that will, we think, take quite a long time. And it's been great. I spent the last few months working very hard on helping us to publish the research we've just published, getting ourselves up and running as an entity and bringing in new colleagues and getting to grips with the interesting world of motorsports and Formula One, which is unlike any other sport I've ever been involved in.
hopefully in a good way.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's good. It's very good.
Okay.
Uh, my name's Kate Bevan. I've been in and around Formula One for far too long, decades long. And I know it doesn't look it, but I am that old. And I've worked for originally for a team. In fact, I'm a lawyer by background, but I don't really like telling too many people that because it prejudices people against you. I think if you tell them you're a lawyer, so we don't mention that. But I trained as a lawyer and I worked for a Formula One team called the Arrows Formula One team back in the 90s. late 90s. In fact, we had Pedro de la Rosa as one of our drivers. um, and I then worked for Bernie Eccleston for many years in a variety of roles in just about every department in that organisation. So I looked after intellectual property, I did licensing and sponsorship, and I ended up, when Liberty came in, running the global hospitality for Formula One, which is the most fun you can have at a desk. It is really good fun job to have. And then More Than Equal came along as a proposition, and I was approached about it by David Coulthard, and immediately he told me what the ambition was. He said, "We've got to put a woman on the top of the podium as a world champion in Formula One." He said, "Are you willing to help?" I said, "I'm in immediately," because that's the attraction of this project. This project is single-minded and focused on solving that problem. There are lots of problems in the world. There are lots of problems in the world of motorsport, which we can't solve. Nobody could solve all of them. But this one, we have to identify what the problem is, and we have to identify what the barriers are stopping this happening, and we have to systematically knock them down one by one and show the world. Because by showing the world one woman on the top of the podium in Formula One with that trophy, you will carve a path for hundreds behind her. And that's what we're going to do. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and it might take a little bit of time, and it's for sure going to take a lot of work, but we are going to do it.
Can you see how easy it was for me to be persuaded to do this job as soon as you hear Kate speaking?
Definitely. I think her, like, the passion she's irradiated, like, I think I can feel it from home all the way from Spain. Okay, great. So tell us. Well, Kate has described the project such a beautiful way. She described it beautifully. Why is it that you think that projects, platforms like this exist, not just More Than Equal, but also other platforms focusing social media to bring, well, I think I'm kind of answering myself a little bit, but kind of bringing the focus on women in motorsport and how we all participate in this incredible sport that is Formula One.
Well, I'm just going to say something first, Allie, because that's relevant to this, is that females are the largest, fastest growing audience sector in Formula One. So Formula One as a global sport has the privilege of having and acquiring a new audience of young female fans. And in fact, Allie, you might agree or disagree with this, but we were speaking before we went live, and I was speculating. I mean, we're an evidence-based organization, and I have absolutely no evidence for what I'm about to say. But I'm just speculating here. But we were commenting on the fact that Formula One seems to attract more and more women as fans. And that's good, because they'll end up being participants, we hope, and that helps our cause. But why does Formula One attract so many women fans? And my take on this is that women love it because it's a game of strategy. It's a clever sport, and I think that's why you get so many women who are attracted to it. It's a game of chess, not checkers. And I think that really appeals to women.
Yeah, and I think the growth and momentum around various programs, including ours, I think that just simply represents the fact that women, in terms of the workforce and the participant base of the sport, are just so widely underrepresented. And, if you look at the research we've just published, less than 10% of the entire participation base of drivers are female. I don't have the stats on how many women sit on executive teams running motorsport, but I would suggest pretty confidently that they're absent from most of the rooms that are making decisions. And when that happens in a sport, you do see initiatives like ours popping up to try and address that. And I think this is really interesting sport because it's got such a globally diverse footprint already. It's way ahead of other sports in that respect in terms of where it is and the popularity of the very elite series, Formula One, but yet it is quite behind in this aspect in terms of gender inclusion in the workforce and in the cars themselves. So that's why there are so many initiatives, not just ours. We wouldn't exist if there wasn't a problem to solve, right? So much like other sports are launching initiatives to solve other problems, this is one of ours.
And which ones you think, not because, as Kate said, you're evidence-based project. So what are the problems? I can't bring the exact word I'm trying to use in English in my mind, but what are the problems you think female
I'll
drivers, female drivers, female I don't know, fans, or overall female population encounter to join the sport?
I'll take the driving aspect, Kate. Maybe you could take the fans aspect and how they're actually feeling and what they think is missing, which our research told us. From a driving perspective, so we've just published something called Inside Track, which is the most comprehensive piece of research ever done into women's involvement in motorsport. It looked at the fan base and really interrogated the views of female fans, which we'll come on to. But from a female driving perspective, what we found are that there are two fundamental challenges facing female drivers. One is there just simply aren't enough of them. And that was probably obvious from the outset, but we were able to pull out some data and some numbers that said the female participation base is between sort of 7 and 13%. It's sort of as high as 13 in karting, and then it drops all the way down to 7 in GT and Formula racing. And clearly that is going to make it incredibly difficult for a woman to succeed at the highest level of the sport because the numbers are just stacked against you. And then the second thing we discovered, so participation gap, and then what we called the performance gap. So we found that if you took, for example, the 10% participation base, you would expect at the other end there to be at least 10% of women in the top talent rankings. And we found that not to be the case. We found that actually just around 4% of the top talent rankings are female drivers. And the reason that is that we found lots of barriers are kind of banging in to the female driver as she continues her journey through the sport. And the report kind of sets those out nicely. And ultimately, that's what we are doing at More Than Equal. We want to tackle that performance gap. It's for others to grow participation in the sport. That's the job of ASNs, the International Federation running the sport, and others. And our focus is on, okay, how do we mitigate or remove those barriers that we found so that performance gap changes? And hey, at the same time, let's hope we see a big growth in driver numbers, because that would really help us too. And then we also found some challenges less challenges, Kate, I guess, is it, but more around how do female fans feel, or female, people who work in the sport feel when they're in the sport, and what do they think about the sport? And that was something that we found too, right?
Yeah, I think when you're trying to change an entire sport, an entire system, it's a jigsaw puzzle. It is not one problem, because if it was one problem that needed solving, I think it would have been done before now. And that's why you have different initiatives. No initiative really on its own is going to be able to crack the problem, because it's a jigsaw. You need all the pieces in the jigsaw to come together. So one of the things that we've asked for is more cooperation and more collaboration with all of the stakeholders. Because if you don't do that, you're going to find that you are just throwing mud at a wall and seeing what sticks. Good luck translating that into Spanish.
I'll have to rewatch it and think about it to translate it.
But I think you need, what we're trying to bring to it is a bit of rigor, a bit of research, a bit of underpinning of evidence base, so that those efforts that there are to make change are all pulling in the same direction and not pulling in different directions. Because for sure, that's one of the biggest things that will make change happen, is everyone pulling in the same direction. That's not easy in sport generally, because generally in sport, people are pulling in different directions, and that's called competition. But this is where you need to put that aside for the greater good of the sport. And remember, we have a huge opportunity here. The fan base wants to see change. Our research showed that very, very clearly, right? Our fan base, which is, getting younger and skewing female, they want to see some real change in the sport, because for them, it's not as relevant as it could be to their interests and their lives. They want to see more done on diversity and inclusion. They want to see more women represented in the sport. They want to see women represented in the media better. They want to see women at the top flight of Formula One. And if they do see that, they've said they will watch more races, they'll go to more races, they will buy more sponsor products. So there is an opportunity for the sport here. And remember, Formula One is the biggest gender neutral sport in the world, right? Formula One could and should be taking a lead on this. Can you imagine the biggest global sporting series, annual sporting series, that is Formula One, with 50% of the drivers on the grid being women? I mean, what an opportunity that is. There would be no other sport that could compete with Formula One if it did that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be almost impossible to get a perfect 50-50 split. Now, because I don't think women are like basketball,
women,
of course.
40% men then.
Yeah, or yeah, I mean 60-40, something like that. It's just, I think that a 50-50 split would be almost impossible, not just, of course, because of different talent. Like, we see different grades of talent on the grid, the actual grid right now. We can see different grades, a gradient of talent. Also because money is a fundamental part of the sports. Formula One motorsport in general is not like football. You can play it wherever you want. You can go to the beach, you can play football. You can go to the streets, you can play football. You can, it's so easy. Just find 2 posts, that's the goal, and play with the ball. And that's it. That's all you need.
But money's difficult for everyone in Formula One,
exactly.
Isn't it? It's difficult for the boys, it's difficult for the girls. I think what we've found is it's more difficult for girls than it is for boys on the financial side. But one of the
and that's interesting. And that's very interesting.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is that money genuinely follows success, right? So sponsors and investors, they want to put their money behind the next Max Verstappen or the next, Lewis Hamilton. And they see a young girl who has the same talent, the same results, the same potential, next to a boy with the same potential and the same results and the same talent. They are naturally going to put their investment and their money towards the boy, aren't they? Because they can see him becoming the next Max or the next Lewis. Exactly. And this is why our mission, even though it is very ambitious, and is important, because until you show that women are successful or at the top level of motorsport, the money won't follow them. Yeah. But if you do show that women have a pathway that they can reach the very, very top and be successful, then the money will start following them.
Yeah, and I agree with that. My point was more on the ways that money is such a fundamental part of it, from karting to Formula One to IndyCar to any top solo city racing, but also, and of course GTs and rallies and all that. It was more of that. Right now we can we talk about paid drivers, people that just pay their way to the grid. So I was more talking about that a 50-50 perfect 50-50 split. I think it's almost impossible, but 2, 3, 4, 6 women, I think that's
it's impossible. It's not impossible because of cost. It's impossible right now because there just aren't enough drivers. It's statistically almost impossible for that even. In fact, we have a stat in our report which says for that to happen, you'd actually, given the issues with performance, you'd actually have to have, is it 84% of the entire participation base would have to be female for there to be a 50-50. Now that's not what we're looking
that's
at.
Impossible.
Yeah, but there are comparables in other sports here. So the one I always use is horse racing because it's a mixed gender sport. It's global. They've had a female Grand National champion recently, Rachel Blackmore, who, like me, is Irish, and we love our horses. And people once said that wasn't possible. And now that she's done that, she has just killed that argument. So no one is saying in the sport anymore, a woman isn't good enough to ride a horse at this level. It's how are they getting enough opportunities, because it's possible. And I think that's, if we succeed in our mission, the conversation will change. It will be about how can we, it may be us forging a lone path for a while and trying to break these barriers down, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We know this is going to be really tough.
Yeah. I mean, of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about having a female Formula One driver. We've had female Formula One drivers in the past, scoring points. Even some, like I was talking with a couple of friends. I think it was 2-3 days ago, and we're talking about Formula One. And he was just like, "Oh, when will we have a Formula One, a female driver?" I was like, "Well, they have been already, women driving Formula One cars and racing Formula One cars, and actually scoring points. Was it Lombardi? I think who scored half a point." And it's like, it's not that it has not been done before, it's that it hasn't happened in 50 years? Almost?
Yeah, nearly 50 years, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 70 something when Lombardi raced.
Yeah.
So it's like, and he was like, "Well, do you think women can race at the same level?" Like, he started asking this question. It's like, well, yes, just like give that woman a car, and I'm sure like they can race at the same level as any other driver right now on the grid. Like, maybe asking for Max Verstappen would be, or Lewis Hamilton would be too much right now, but like, why not in the future? Because I think Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, they're drivers, they come once in a decade.
Yeah.
From a huge pool. But that's what you said. Like, there's such a huge pool of male drivers. We see it in Formula 2, we see it in Formula 3. There's Sofia in Formula 3 that recently also scored points in Formula 3. But we don't have that same pool of women there. And they are driving programs. Like, there are some women in drivers programs. In Alpine, I think they have several female drivers in their programs. I think Mercedes also has a couple. I'm thinking about a very young one, Luna Fluchade, I think it's her name. She's Spanish. Like, we have that. They're just not reaching the top. And something I encountered on your report, the report like you both are mentioning, is the systemic bias that you mentioned right now very lightly. There was, if you encountered two talents, you're more sponsors are more biased to support the male driver. And thinking about this, and also thinking about different, like in Alex Albon, who is racing under a Thailand flag instead of a British flag, probably because it would be easier for him to get sponsors from Thailand than competing against all the British drivers to get sponsorship. Why is it that it's not the same when we talk about gender? We talk about nationality that can give you a push. Why it's not just like, let's sponsor? Why do you think brands are not eager to say, let's bring this woman up, like let's sponsor these women? Because of course there will be more people will buy your product. Probably we can see it happen with Fernando Alonso. How many people in Spain bought an Aston Martin t-shirt because Fernando Alonso is driving Aston Martin? And of course, attending races. Like, why do you think that's systemic bias? And also, why do you think this is happening? Of course,
I think that's what our research. That's what our research is there for, Gada. It's sponsorship, and I've done many hundreds of sponsorship deals. Sponsors are generally rational. They take rational decisions based on where their money should be spent on, but they are slightly risk averse. So as I said to you, if they had a 14-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy, it's not that they definitely won't sponsor the girl. It's that they need a bit more persuading to do it. And at the moment, there's nobody there persuading them. Our research, I hope, will help with that, will help every young female driver out there, because it allows them, it gives them some data to give to potential sponsors, to say to those potential sponsors, I know you haven't seen a woman in Formula One for nearly 50 years, but believe me, I'm it. And by the way, if you invest in me, then the fan base, which is a growing female fan base, is going to love you, and they're going to seek out your products, and they're going to buy them, and all good things will happen. And I think that's why we need this kind of research doing, so that young female talent can go and persuade the backers and the sponsors to invest in them and take that risk. I think once you find a successful female driver, once you get a woman up there, I think they will attract a lot of sponsorship.
And probably different type of sponsorship too, Kate. Female consumer brands are not exactly widely prevalent, for example, in motorsport. If you look at the kind of mix of sponsors and brands who are connected to, say, women's football or men's football, they tend to be quite different because the fan base is different, and because obviously you've got a brand ambassador who is female. I think the issue of sponsorship is an interesting one generally in women's sport. All women's sports have struggled to match the kind of value of sponsorship placed on men compared to them. But I think this is an interesting sport because it's mixed gender, and there aren't a whole load of mixed gender global sports. So as Kate says, I think once we start to see a woman climbing the ranks and she looks like she's going to be good enough to drive an F1, I do think that will change, and it will be it'll be quite different picture then.
And I think right now with this conversation, I understand much better the importance people put in having a role model, which is not just a role model for girls to follow, but kind of like a beacon, like a lighthouse, for brands to see, okay, so she did it. Let's get on board and try to get the next one in. But also, it was one of my questions, because I've encountered this a lot, like why having a role model is so important. More like having a female role model, because I've had conversations with friends saying, well, I don't think having a female role model is like the key point, because male friends tell me, because you have inspired me, being from another gender, you have inspired me to start this blog or to go live on Twitch and do these things. So I think it's not just like having a role model of a little girl saying, I can be like her. It's more people getting on board with we can have more like her. They could be more like her if we we put out efforts.
You have to, if you are a participant in a sport, you have to be able to look up to the top of that sport and see yourself reflected if you want to succeed. That's just, we have all sorts of evidence which tells us that, the phrase we use over here is can't see, can't be. If you can't see it, then it's very difficult for you to kind of aspire to be it. And we don't have at the very top of motorsport consistent female role models because there are just so few female drivers competing at the elite end. There's only a handful even currently competing in the top end of international series. And I think that is incredibly it's a big miss for the sport currently, because these things are circular. So yes, we have a low participation base, but if you had a woman next year competing in F1 and doing really well, I guarantee you those two things would change. And the example I've been giving recently is after the Women's Euros over here in England last summer, which was massive in terms of reach and crowds and so on. The FA, who already have a huge number of women and girls playing football here, saw 13 to 15% rise in registrations in the 3 months afterwards, because young girls are looking at it saying, oh, I could do that. You might not be good enough to play for England, but you can see yourself in the mix. And currently that is largely missing from the elite end of motorsport. Not completely. You mentioned a few, obviously Sophia doing really well in F3, Jamie in Indy Next and others, but hugely important. And I keep, anytime I meet F1 teams or anyone else, I talk about the importance of storytelling and showing the drivers and the women that are in senior roles in your company platform them consistently and show them. I just saw your cat emerging behind you.
Yeah.
That's great.
she usually just stays in a corner and sleeps her way, like sleeps, throughout the live streaming, but sometimes she just decides to walk a little bit. And
I guess we all have cats.
Yeah. Okay. Also, something very important to remark that actually my boyfriend pointed out to me a couple of years ago is the importance of media. And as you said, like the Euro was a blast in England, and you saw like peaks, of female like girls signing up for football.
Yep.
It also happened a few years ago with, I don't know if it was karate or fencing, that we had a Spanish champion, and a lot of people, like for the first time ever, like they appeared in the media. A lot of people signed up for, I don't know if it was karate, fencing, or judo. I can't remember exactly the sports. And it's also kind of circular, because if it's not seen, not just like be there, women being there, if they're not like seen, if you don't cast a light on them saying, look, she's here, she's great, she's doing amazingly well, it's like they're not there, and you're gonna see it. I'm thinking about Hannah Smith, such a great strategist, Red Bull, key to a lot of Red Bull victories, and so many years, like you could see her every once in a while, but more recently years, last season or 2021, you could see a lot more of her, and not just her, but other female engineers. And I think that's also drawing attention to them and drawing female fans. We talked to Katie about this a little bit, and I said also the amazing job the teams are doing, in social media platforms to show the drivers, to show content. You have McLaren with the Lando and Piastri. Well, it was Carlos and Lando, then Ricardo and all that. You have the C-square challenges that Ferrari, it's making with Carlos and Charles. So, do you think it should be like, of course, media, it's key, but other aspect, would you think it's key, like to show? And do you think teams need to put more effort in this, or FOM or Liberty Media, Pro Formula One broadcasting, of course?
Yeah, I think I'll start, Ali. You can continue, because I think we've both got views on this. But our research showed that the fan base do think, I think this surprised us actually, they do think that the media doesn't represent women in the sport particularly well. And when we presented these results to the F1 media, I think they were slightly surprised. But I think the audience feels it. So the language that's used, the way that women are talked about, the way that women in the sport are represented, or indeed whether they're represented there at all. I mean, you look at, you're right to talk about Hannah Schmidt. We've had, how many is it? Is it 3 women strategists now in Formula One teams? It's probably one of the most critical roles, technical roles you can have in a Formula One team, because the decisions you're making by each second in a race can win or lose a race, and it's women. And you've had Bernie Collins is another one, and that's fantastic. But I think the way that women are talked about, the language that's used, the way they're represented and the way they're not represented is really, really important for the media. But then the biggest media output is from the teams, the way they talk about it, the drivers, how they talk about it, Formula One, the series, how they talk about it, the FIA, how they talk about it. You can't dump this all on the broadcasters. It's everyone. It's every stakeholder who's putting content out there needs to think about how they're doing it and what they're doing. I don't know whether you've got anything on top of that to add, Ali.
Well, I agree with all of that. But I think it's also making those stakeholders realize that there is a bit of a problem here. And I think that's why there was some surprise from some of the stakeholders we spoke to who are looking after content, because for many it was like, well, this is great. We often feature women in motorsport. And I think what the fan base is saying is it's stereotypical occasionally, because that's what the question we asked was about stereotypes. And they said the media actually largely reinforce stereotypes of women in motorsport. And so I think that's, when you speak to F1 teams, you're sort of saying, well, yeah, you do put some really good content out there about the women in your programs or in your workforce, but it's largely inconsistent, and it's maybe not quite reflective of what the fan base is actually after. So like this whole thing, everything we're talking about here is about making sure you've got facts and you understand what's actually happening. This is a very data-driven sport, but yet I was very surprised when I came in how anecdotal it was about women in motorsport, and how people just made presumptions based on what they think. The question that your boyfriend or your friends that gave to you about are women actually able to drive the cars and all the rest of it? People had very strong views about that without having any evidence to back it up. So I think the same is true with the media coverage and all the rest of it. The research that we've done actually puts facts into the kind of motorsport ecosystem, and I hope that people take the time, whether they're content creators or they're engineers or they're driver selectors, to take the time to read it and really understand it.
And why do you think it might be? This is a question my brother started asking. Why do you think it's so difficult to get women, female, like drivers, engineers, whatever, in the media or in streams? Like, we have tried we have invited several female like drivers, engineers. I can think why they're in the teams protect a lot, like what their team members say and where they appear and all that. I can understand that, but why do you think it's so difficult to get them in the media, be fairly represented in the media?
Well, I have no idea what kind of content decisions are being taken behind the scenes, but number one, there aren't enough. We met some F1 teams this week, and I sort of tentatively asked, well, how many of your workforce are female? And nobody gives you an answer. They just sort of say not enough, and realize that it's not. So one, there aren't enough. Two, I guess this is a heavily male-dominated sport, and it's instinctive to go to the content that is going to be very popular, and that may be, if you're Mercedes, it's Lewis doing something. If you're McLaren, it's Lando or whatever. So, but I don't know. I mean, all we can do is talk to to those who have influence over content to say your fan base is actually looking for something slightly different here, and this is what they've told us.
But I think it's also that the type of the content. So, if you do have a woman aerodynamicist working for a team, what you don't necessarily want to see, although in itself that's good, is a woman aerodynamicist coming on to social media or to any content platform and talking about how tough it's being a woman in a man's world. What you want her to come on is you want her to come on and talk about aerodynamics, right? Because that's her job. And it's completely normal that she's up there and she's talking about the aerodynamics of the car and not about the fact, isn't it been a struggle for her to get where she is? Because I think, that's my personal view. We've moved beyond that. We need, if the teams, I think, not just the teams, that's unfair, but across the ecosystem, if everyone had a mind to making sure that the women that were there were represented well, and that means they're represented doing the smart jobs they're doing, not tokenistically as women.
We are talking a lot about gender gaps, because that's like more than equal like movement they're trying to bring light on and stuff. But for example, we've had a woman here, Claudia Salzers. She did an internship. I think it was in VAR. Formula 3 and now Formula 2 team. For Amersfoort Racing, it's a Dutch racing team. And we talked about her role in that internship. She she was working on trying to write a code that would predict driver performance, for talent, seeking talent. and stuff, do you think like that content will be more beneficiary than, of course, bringing a woman and talking over and over again how difficult it is to be a female in a male-dominated industry? Because most of the time, like, most of the times I've seen teams bring up women, they talk a lot about how important it is to have role models, how important it is to be seen, and like that kind of questions, about that, and very little about the job itself, about being in engineering and which steps did you take? I usually ask my people I have these pit talks with, who supported you the most, or what was the biggest struggle that you encountered. And I'm very glad that you said this, because in just a couple of weeks we are having another pit talk, and this time it's with a female engineer. And I wasn't planning on asking, how difficult it is to be a female engineer. But thank you, because now I for sure will not even come close to that.
Can you ask her how a Formula One car works? Because I still don't know.
I can.
Can I interject with two things, because I think this topic is really interesting. The first is that it's exhausting being a trailblazer. It's so tiring, right? If you are, and unfortunately, there are so few women in leading positions in this sport right now, that you have to look those trailblazers in the eye and say, this is going to be really tiring for you. Unfortunately, you're going to have to answer those questions. And if you don't want to, that's fine. And it may be, by the way, to your earlier question, that some women don't want to do it. They don't want to be the first and feel all the pressure of saying everything in the right way, people coming after them. But that is just true. You speak to any pioneer in women in sport, and they talk about how tiring that was. And the second thing is, we're just going to have to get used, unfortunately, to those questions, and there'll be years in the making. Hang on 1 second. Please don't come in.
Yeah, don't
Sorry,
worry.
my child is here. There's years ahead of that. I'm sorry. Yeah, you sit over there. There's years of this ahead. So women's rugby, which is my sport, the girls are still getting these questions. And if you compare the coverage that they get versus the men, coverage on them is about their backstory, how hard it was for them to juggle things, what they do in their spare time, very much less on tactics and technical aspects of the sport. That's unfortunately just the way sports coverage is at the moment. I'm sorry about
it. Don't worry about it.
I'll just quickly turn my camera off. You carry on for a second.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but I'm with you. I think that's right, and I think that it is inevitable that you get asked those kinds of questions.
And now that you brought it up, I myself, I'm thinking about past interviews and and things I saw on media and stuff. Women, how many times I thought, that question again. Why are you wasting time asking her how difficult it is? We all know how difficult it is. Why don't you use your time?
As a fan, if you were listening to the coverage after a race, and Hannah Schmidt came on, you want her to tell you what was going through her mind when she made those 2 strategy calls during the race, right? It doesn't matter whether she's a woman or not, that you want to know what was going through the mind of the strategist of Red Bull when they made those 2 calls during the race. Right? It's daft that you would immediately after the race start asking her about her struggle to get where she is, And I think that it would be really nice if women, the media and everyone in the ecosystem and the team put more women up, and they were asked questions about what they're doing, not about who they are, because then it just normalizes it. It becomes completely normal to see women on there talking about aerodynamics or computational fluid dynamics or whatever it is.
Well, I can tell you for free that is, we have years ahead of that coverage. I mean, even if you look at it, I read the Times every day, and there's a couple of articles today about the Women's Football World Cup that it just wouldn't be there if it was the Men's World Cup, and it's annoying. I think fans, female fans in particular, are being, you want to read about tactics and technical aspects of the sport. I want to read about the formations the teams are playing and what makes those good, and I want to see those graphics, but you don't always get that with women, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And
Sorry, you've got me on a passion project, a passion topic here.
no, that's great. You know, like when like showing passion, I think it's great, and getting excited about your passion. You know, when you're talking to someone, they start telling you something that makes them so passionate, and you're like, I don't know why you find it so passionate, but just seeing your joy, that sparkle you know, in that person's eyes, you're like, tell me all about it. You know, I would sit and listen to you. So yeah, I think it's amazing to bring that kind of passion, and it's also kind of what we're trying here at the channel, to bring a 360 perspective of this sport, not just driving, and you know, we bring up strategy, human resources with sponsorship, drivers, people are trying to be drivers, you know, all of that. So that's, don't say sorry, just I'm so thankful for it. Really, I'm so thankful. Okay, I've had this question pop up in the chat, which is, do you think we will see a female Formula One driver short term, or do you think it's more mid term? And if it were short term, who do you think it would be?
Who's going to take that one, Ali?
It's your turn.
Realistically, no, I don't think it's a short-term play here. And that is, I mean, the work we did on the numbers in Formula One, we worked with Rob Smedley. Rob Smedley is a data god. You know, he's worked in Formula One with Williams and Ferrari, and he's a data genius. And you look at the numbers simply do not support the proposition that you will find the chances, the prospects of a woman on the podium in Formula One in the near future. What we hope to do are more than equal by addressing that performance gap. So we need others to go and get girls karting. We need others to go and sort out the gap in participation between girls and boys. And we put a challenge to the sport to go and do that. Our job at More Than Equal is to deal with that performance gap. That means that when we do get those girls more girls participating, that more of them translate into the top rankings, right? If we can do that, then we will shorten the time it will take to put a woman on the podium in Formula One. The time it will take, we have said somewhere maybe 8 to 10 years it will take, because you're kind of looking at a girl karting now, put them through a development program. We think it's going to take that long. You might get lucky, and you know, a lot of Formula One is luck as well, remember, so who knows.
Yeah, look, there are some really talented, you know, drivers, female drivers competing at a high end of motorsport now, but the odds are against them getting into Formula One for many of the reasons we've already outlined. I think one of the things to say is that a key part of our program, which we're just looking to get off the ground now, is a female driver development program. So we've just hired today, actually, a brilliant guy from British Cycling, Tom Stanton, to come in and run that program for us. So we're looking at taking young female talent. So, you know, I'm not going to stick a number on the exact age because we have to look at the pool first, but probably more in the kind of early teens age, and bringing a cohort of drivers together and then investing in them through that pathway. So, you know, for that reason alone, from our perspective, it's unlikely that we'll be backing and supporting in the short term a driver who's going to end up in F1, but hopefully medium to long term is where we're at.
Good. And I was going to ask you about that program because I read in the report that you put out. Why is it so important to have like a specific program for female drivers? Like, I'm thinking more about I don't know, coaching, like coaching. I don't know. Yeah, like the training programs other teams have. Why do you think it's so important to have like a female like centered program? Because you also talk about maybe differences in how the car is designed that draw biases towards male drivers, not female drivers. And Yeah, and
Yeah,
those
so
sort of stuff.
I think that at its simplest, because boys and girls and their bodies are different, and how you train to maximize the performance of a female athlete versus a male athlete, especially those going through adolescence, which is kind of what we're looking at in our program, are different. I mean, there have been great advances made in gender sport science in the last number of years, but actually it's still quite a way behind in terms of what we know about how you train a young girl or a female athlete going through her teenage years. So that's one. The second is when you've got a group together like that, we don't have a lot of data. So we've got some data from the W Series, but we don't have a lot of data and knowledge about maximizing female driving performance, whether it's from a physiological perspective or it's the technical, tactical side. And by having that cohort together on one program, there'll be very kind of accelerated learnings, right? Because we're going to have the data at our fingertips. And lastly, there isn't one. There is no program which is specifically focusing on a gender specific lens through training. And we're working with Hints of Performance, who work with lots of F1 drivers now, and adding to that. Kate, you speak very well on this as well. So I don't know if you want to come in, but those are just some of the basics, I think.
Well, I mean, yes, you won't find Olympic elite level sports where the training program is exactly the same for young male as young female athletes in athletics or tennis or whatever. So, motorsport and Formula One is a little bit behind the curve on that, behind other sports on that. Why? As Ali said, because the way that a body develops is different between the ages of, say, 14 and 18 for a girl than it is for a boy. And that means biomechanically, nutritionally, hormonally. You asked about the design of the car, and I go back to what we were talking about before. This is a jigsaw puzzle. Are there design biases in the equipment? The answer to that question is we don't know. So here's a good idea. Let's go and find out. So let's go and find out whether there are any design biases in the equipment that, of course, has been designed around a male body, because they've only had male drivers in top flight motorsport. But these things fit together. You have to interrogate every piece of the jigsaw to see whether there is or is not, based on the evidence that you can best bring together, there is a bias that is affecting girls' and women's chances of progressing. If there is, it's not fair, so get rid of it. And if there isn't, move on and go and tackle another problem. So physicality, yes, of course they need a separate training program because their bodies are completely different in those incredibly important years. And your question about the equipment, yes, of course, go and have a look at it. Let's go and see. Go and find out.
But, yeah.
That'll be fun. It's fun, this, isn't it? Learning new stuff.
Yeah, I think it is. And apart from the program, what is More Than Equal focusing on? Because as you said, it's a puzzle, so you're probably focusing on other things. But you said you're focusing more on the performance gap.
Yeah.
But
so, yeah. We got 4 kind of pillars to our strategy. One is to commission research into women in motorsport that hasn't been done before. We've just done the first piece of that, but there's much more to come from us. And we need that research, not just to educate and inform the whole ecosystem in the sport, but also to help us. So how do we continue to evolve our program with facts, data, and insight? Well, we'll do that. So that's one. The second is the program we've just touched on. So the female driver development program. The third, although it will come before, is looking at a sophisticated way of identifying female talent. So currently, as you saw in the report, because you read it, there isn't the data around participation in motorsport is not as good as it should be. And actually, we found it very difficult to find out very simple facts like where female drivers are, how many there are, and how well they're doing. So we're currently exploring, we don't want to, and there's no point, you're always taking a punt with a cohort of young athletes. So some will make it, some won't. And there's no way you can tell all of that when they're young. You can only really go on potential. And actually, it's quite difficult in motorsport to find that, because the systems of data are just not robust enough. So we're exploring how we could make that better for female drivers. So that's the kind of third plank, is kind of talent ID and doing that in a more sophisticated way. We're currently talking to a number of partners about how we do it. And lastly, we know that, as our program evolves and we hopefully emerge with a number of talented female drivers in a few years' time who are capable of looking like they can move up that F1 pyramid, they'll need to be connected with investors and with teams, and so we're committed to kind of using our network to help them to do that. So those are the 4 pillars. Kate, have I left anything out?
No. Thankfully, there are only 4 pillars, so they're easy to remember. Thank God we haven't got 20 pillars.
Well, it's one of the beautiful things about this job for me was to come. How often do you get to go and work somewhere which has one very clear goal? I've worked in jobs where you had 10, and underneath that you had several strategies, and everything becomes slightly diluted and confusing, and it becomes very hard to actually hit your goals. Where here, one clear target, 4 pillars underneath that, and off we go. And it's brilliant, actually, because you're never going to be sidetracked. And we talk about, there are loads of things you could do in women in motorsport, but we can't, we're not a campaigning group, for example. We're not a lobbying group. For sure, we are going to talk about things and commission research which may make change, and ultimately that is in effect campaigning, but that's not what we are. We are actually a female driver development program, supported by other tools which I mentioned, trying to get a woman onto the podium.
And I think we've said what we're going to do. I think, because before we leave, because I think our time is up in a minute, but yep. I think what I want to leave with is want to ask your audience a couple of favors, to do 2 things. One, go to morethanequal.com and download the report and have a look at it, right? See what you think of it. And secondly, go and find a young, talented female driver on whatever social media channel you're on, and follow them and support them, because that's a very practical thing you can do to help young talent. They need, it doesn't take much. Just follow them, support them, and adopt them as yours, and it will help them.
Okay. Yeah. I'll make sure we put them in the right track. I'll myself go to morethanequal.com and find the link to the report, because I have the PDF file. So yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much. The hour has gone by so fast. I think it's a very interesting subject, and you have brought it in such a great way. I don't know, as you said, you're not lobbying, you're not I can't remember the exact word, I'm sorry.
Campaigning.
Yeah, you're not campaigning. You're based. You base yourself on evidence and research, of course, a lot of research. You said, Kate, how exciting it is to learn new stuff. And and I think you're doing such a great work, and everything you exposed has been amazing and entertaining and passionate, Allie. Thank you so much, really. I always finish up the interviews, the bit talks, extending an invitation from my brother. He's already putting it in the chat. He's invited you to the Isle of Man.
I've never been to the Isle of Man.
Yeah, well, he lives there, so he always invites people over the island. And and of course, these channel, P-Talks are always open for any talent, female or male. So yeah, any common female driver is invited, of course, to the channel. And I really just hope you had a great time, that you enjoyed being in the channel, that the overall experience has been good for you. That's very important.
I can't believe I'm on Twitch. We're on Twitch, Allie. Hey!
Very easy, please.
Of course, and really just keep up with the good work. I think it's amazing what you're doing. the initiative and the project. I haven't seen anything like it before, which I think is kind of the point. Because I know how David Coulthard is really involved, invested in this in this thing, this project of, you know, bringing female drivers. Because of course, not just his experience with his sister, but also with the W series, which he was a key part of. And now, well, there's now Fallen Academy and stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for being so passionate, for letting me kidnap you, for letting me kidnap you for an hour. And yeah,
Great. I'm sure we can speak again in the future.
I would love that very much. I would love that
Thank
very
you, and
much.
thank you to your cat. What's your cat called?
Nala.
Nala. Thank you, Nala.
Yeah, my brother calls her Nala Prost, which I think it's great. We just call her Mala in Spain, in here, because, you know, Mala is like a bat, and she's sometimes, well, she's a cat. She will sometimes break things, so we just call her Mala. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all, guys, for watching from home. I will upload this Speed Talk as soon as I can, as soon as I figure things with YouTube. Because, yeah, it's getting on my nerves now. Well, is there anything you would like to add? I didn't ask you this.
Oh, good.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, of course, you're invited again whenever you want. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
Have a great evening.
See you later.
Too. See you. See you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Vale. Uf, voy a cerrar ya aquí. Pues nada. Voy a parar la grabación.